Welcome to Rev'd Up for Sunday. We are the clergy of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut, and I'm Peter Walsh.
I'm Elizabeth Garnsey.
I'm John Kennedy.
And we are so happy that you're with us. Today we have a piece of the Good Shepherd discourse, and so we're going to discourse about the Good Shepherd. Let's take a look at it. It's John 10:11-18. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, who is not the shepherd, does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because a hired hand does not care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father. Okay, so Jesus is interpreting the beginning of the parable the parable that was just before this. Mm-hmm. What do you make of all this?
Mm-hmm.
Well, since we are not reading the first part this year, which is the portion we get last year, year A, and the 3-year lectionary cycle, might be worth just sort of teeing it up. And Jesus tells this parable that he's now interpreting in response to the growing opposition he is getting for things like most recently healing the blind man on the Sabbath, the man born blind on the Sabbath. Mm-hmm. So this is in response to controversy that is growing, to opposition. And just a reminder of what we covered last year, Good Shepherd doesn't mean like cuddly Jesus so much as King Jesus. It's serious, as you said last time, hardball stuff. So it just continues here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One interesting thing is that I think this is the first time, unless you count John chapter 3, we don't really know who's talking in John chapter 3 when it says the Son of Man must be lifted up. Is that John's voice, the narrator's voice? Is that Jesus' voice? Unclear. Mm-hmm. But aside from that, this might be the first time that Jesus says he's going to die in John's gospel.
Oh, that is interesting.
And it's not long before he says in 12, when I am lifted up, he does go on and claim that.
Right.
Also, in John 9, when you mentioned him healing the man born blind, and the Pharisees observe that, and I think that Jesus is also interpreting that sign. Is that what you mean? He interprets the man born blind scenario to the Pharisees.
Because he's interpreting the parable before that too. Excuse me.
Yeah. Because I think that the man born blind is critical to understanding this too, what he's saying. Because there's no break between him doing that and him saying all these things about himself. And when he gets to this part, that my sheep know me and know my voice, the man born blind was blind. He heard Jesus's voice, went into the pool and was healed and came out and started claiming that Jesus was from God. He had to be from God because nobody else could do such a thing. And that's when he gets thrown out by the religious authorities. So I think Jesus is really, zeroing in on that to say, you're throwing this guy out, but he's actually one of the fold, and you're like the wolf or the hired hand that doesn't care for the sheep. Mm-hmm. I think that's a really crystallized accusation here that Jesus is making to the Pharisees.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, we get into this question as we move through the podcast, the different voicings of the different gospels, and here we get again Jesus as a man who is very bold in his voicing. Mm-hmm. And in none of the gospels does Jesus really pull any punches here, but now in this section we get 2 times Jesus identifying himself with the I am statements. I am the gate and I am the door earlier, and now we have the Good Shepherd. And as you said, that this is not cuddly Jesus here, and that word good in the Greek is noble. He is the heroic shepherd here. He's divinely heroic shepherd, but he is not only the divinely heroic shepherd. We get into all sorts of theology around the crucifixion and that the heroic shepherd, I mean, he says he lays down his life for a sheep, a statement that is shocking. It makes zero sense to some level. What shepherd would lay down his life for a sheep? Because that wouldn't do any good anyway. But Jesus really ramps, as he does in John's Gospel, he ramps this up to a whole other level and begins to talk in metaphorical language in a completely different level, in which he is saying that he essentially is fulfilling a divine calling, and he has that divinity in him to do that. I've been very interested, Elizabeth, in hearing your thoughts, in particular around the question of when he says, "I lay down my life and I pick it up, and I have the power to do so." Because you have a lot to say about the crucifixion as Jesus absorbing the suffering and pain of the world, and Jesus as victim of that, and which is really laid out strongly in some of the other Gospels, Mark's in particular, where Jesus is a victim. But here in John's Gospel, we get Jesus absorbing the pain of the world, but not as victim.
Right.
He maintains his agency in free choice, in fulfillment of the Father's command. I wonder if you have any different sense of how to interpret that.
Oh, I think this is a great example of that. And we missing the part where it says, those who'd come through the gate and all that stuff. He's referring to the sheep's gate just before this. And of course, the sheep's gate is where the sacrificial sheep come in to the temple. And, or that's one way to read it. And he's saying, here when he says the shepherd lays down his life for the sheep, the difference between the shepherd and the sheep disappears, and he becomes one of the sheep. And he's sort of the victim who's also the good shepherd who takes the place of the other sheep. And, he identifies with them. These are like the fodder put into the machinery of the sacrificial system, and he's exposing this in a way that's, you can't unsee it. He's trying to heal everybody of their blindness to this. And so as the shepherd, he joins the sheep, walks through this way with them, but intentionally. He's not, just one of the fodder that's getting caught up, but by intentionally putting himself in this place, he's going to throw some clogs into the machinery and make everybody look at it, and then when he comes back to forgive and everything, it's exposed. And I think that's where he's here to identify, he's going to join the sheep, become himself the victim, and lead the sheep out of the sheepfold,
Wow.
And then we have modern examples, more modern 20th century examples in Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., who also intentionally put themselves into this place of, the mass innocents who were kind of caught up in a system of oppression and slavery and, lack of civil rights. And, by their intentional movement, they're willing to be sacrificed in this system to show the world what's happening, in the hopes that the sheep who come after, the people who come after them, won't suffer the same fate. And I think that's the difference between the intentional victim, Jesus, and the ones who can't but be caught up in it because they're just fodder for the machinery, for the powerful who control everything.
Wow. Yeah. I think a potential resolution between Jesus's agency and victimhood, as you introduced the word victim, which I know is picking up on a conversation that is long running, just made me think about how the word itself, victim, in its original use and its original meaning, meant specifically a sacrificial animal. And then it's obviously that meaning has been broadened, but that's where it comes from, which is super interesting. So
it is.
Jesus's agency, his kingship here, again, shepherd being a royal metaphor for kings of Israel in the Hebrew scriptures, which Jesus is clearly applying to himself here. So obviously Jesus is mighty here, but he also becomes a victim. He chooses to. Anyway, so a potential resolution I see is Peter, this obviously comes from Philippians, first of all, but it was in your sabbatical sharing, this desire for a kenotic disposition. Kenotic being a self-emptying disposition, kenosis being the Greek word that St. Paul uses in Philippians to describe what Christ did, emptying himself of his divine power and majesty in a way, to become lowly and to die. So Jesus chooses this, but it is what he chooses. I think that's really interesting.
Both of you are shockingly interesting. I mean, phenomenal response to my question. I really learning from each of you, continually learning from each of you, deepening my understanding of Jesus's actions here. I think that one of the things that I also, in addition to that, I find interesting, again, in the voicing that we get in John's Gospel versus the voicing we get in some of the other Gospels, and how we're to learn from each of the voicings, is that Jesus says, I have the power to lay it down, and there's tremendous allusions to laying down his life, but he also says he has the power to pick it up again. And I think one of the things that I had wrestled with for a long time was, how much power does Jesus have? And in John's Gospel, if I hear it, to the Hebrew mind, this would be, only God has the power of life and death, and Jesus is saying, I have the power of life and death. And that as I understand it, and maybe not correctly, but as I understand it, in John's Gospel, Jesus has the power to resurrect himself. Mm-hmm. It is not the power of the Father who resurrects himself, that he has the power to resurrect himself. And there's an allusion to that.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, Jesus goes on to say at the end of John chapter 10, which we're looking at, the Father and I are one. Mm-hmm. So obviously it's both, but maybe whereas in the Synoptic Gospels, you don't get the clear sense that Jesus has the power to raise himself. In John, I think you do. I mean, it's right here.
Yeah, well, I mean, they have that crazy sentence here where it has the word because. For this reason, the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. That word because, I think, can be challenging, because it makes it sound like the Father's love is conditional. Mm-hmm. I'm loved because I did what he wanted me to do, kind of thing.
Right. I think it can also mean therefore.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. It's evidence. In other words, we would read it, for this reason, the Father loves me. The evidence will be that I lay down my life and take it up again. And it's evident. Yeah. So I think that, because that word's a hard word. It's a kind of clanky
They're making
word.
a big choice
very
here
clanky.
to translate
Very clanky word for us in the English.
Yeah. Beware the booby traps in John.
Right.
They're everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think they're all correct, because there's so many double, triple meanings. So maybe we just have to pick one in English. But in Greek, you can get all the meanings.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting, Peter. That's great. I also want to point out how the number of allusions to shepherds and sheep in our high points in our liturgy, and especially through Holy Week and Easter. Psalm 23 is the Good Shepherd. It's so placid. It's so beautiful and comforting. The image of being, protected from danger in the valley of the shadow of death and fearing no evil. And then you get Isaiah 53, which is, like the lamb led to the slaughter, the suffering servant. And Jesus is sort of all these things, the Good Shepherd, the sheep, the Lamb of God, and the lamb being led to the slaughter. And then by the time you get to Revelation, I think Revelation 7, there's the passage that's much more kind of hopeful. And it says, the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd, and he will guide them to springs of the water of life, kind of reference to Psalm 23.
Such an incredible
And God
passage.
will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Mm-hmm. So, we get a lot of allusions to this. It's a really powerful image. I think the main thing in the gospel is just this good shepherd who's also the Lamb of God, the sacrificial lamb.
Yeah.
But it leads, to this lamb on the throne.
Yeah, we also have all the pastoral language, and in the New Testament we have basically bishops as pastors. Mm-hmm. I mean, the fact that we were in the grocery store the other day, you probably didn't catch us, and I think we came through the line together, and we were all dressed the same, and finally this woman said to me, "Are you pastors?" And I said, yes. And she said, "Oh, I just thought it was a kind of style thing."
Oh my gosh.
Until there was three of us. And suddenly I said, "Well, it's a style thing."
We walk in like men in black.
Yeah. Don't you think we
so
look cool?
funny.
Yeah. But anyway, that we use all this pastoral language, even though we just don't have sheep and shepherds in our neighborhood.
Our bishops even hold crooks.
They hold crooks.
Yes.
This thing is deeply embedded.
It is deep.
It's everywhere in the scriptures. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. Just a little aside, and then I want to talk about something else. When I was at Kent, some students, mostly international students, did not know that I didn't just choose to dress like this, that it was like a uniform. They had no idea. And I knew this because there were other bald teachers and they would get us mixed up. I'm like, one day that this happened, it was Ash Wednesday. So I'm standing there in a cassock giving ashes to go on campus. And somebody's like, oh, hi, Mr. Saxon. I'm like, I'm wearing like a dress. All right. So, okay. So back to the text. We've unpacked the shepherd imagery really powerfully, especially Elizabeth, with what you're saying about how Jesus is the lamb and the shepherd. And that is absolutely embedded in the scriptures in John and Revelation. Like, wow. Another piece of this I think we should take up, just like Jesus takes up his life, is the bit about Jesus, the shepherd, having other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I think maybe it's not that hard to unpack the meaning of that. It's just, Jesus is a Jew. He's dealing with Jews at this point. His God, his father, is the God of Israel, the God who called Israel. And yet his mission and his embrace is bigger than that, is broader than that. That's interesting in and of itself, but maybe something we can sort of take for granted because we know Christianity became much more than a Jewish movement. Kind of everybody knows that. But maybe what is more interesting is that this is saying that Gentiles, that is non-Jews, are like no longer the problem, no longer the enemy. I think my understanding of the Judaism of Jesus's time understood the problem that the people of Israel were facing as being a matter of sort of Gentile encroachment and oppression, and therefore the Gentiles, the powers, whether it's the Romans or the Greeks or the Persians or the Babylonians, they're the problem. And God has promised to deliver Israel from them. It's sort of an us and them sort of thing. This is not representative of the totality of Jewish thinking at all. Jesus is not introducing novelty here. He's picking up on a strain that was there. You read it in the prophets, particularly in Isaiah, that I will give you as a light to the nations and so on. But yet that perspective may not have been comprehended and really taken on by everybody of Jesus's time. And so Jesus is introducing, but emphasizing this reality that the problem is not the other people. Right. The people are actually not the problem. It's our broken relationships and power dynamics. It's our sin, but not other people. Yeah.
I think you're really onto a great line of thinking there. And I think, and in the writing of John's gospel, it's the latest gospel. I think by this time there are clear fractures just in Christian communities, one with another. And if you had to read Raymond Brown, or got to read Raymond Brown, like I did in seminary, The Beloved Community, it's all about the Johannine community and how in this reference, it could be that he's only talking about other Christian groups, the writer of John is sort of saying, you're not the only ones. We have other Christian communities. We all must be one. There's one flock, one shepherd, and might be the sort of first iteration of a fractured church where it's being named and trying to be brought back. But of course, anthropologically, or in a human context, I think Jesus is well aware that this is just the beginning seeds of showing all of humanity what's happening here, and that ultimately, yes, there's like one flock, one shepherd, one humanity, one Lord. So I think, we've said in previous podcasts that sin in a way can be reduced to like shutting others out of the kingdom of God and all the ways that we do that. And so I think that Jesus, when he says in John, as you've already said, when I am lifted up, I will draw all people to myself. And I don't know if that comes in John 12. Is that where we were talking about that? But here he's already laying that groundwork that it's really for everyone. And it's not just for this exclusive community.
Yeah.
That wasn't very clear, but
No, it was clear. I was interesting, and I'm particularly interested that you referenced Raymond Brown in his book, The Beloved Community, because I was going to reference Raymond Brown in his 1966 book that I loved, the double volume of a commentary on John's Gospel, where Raymond Brown's perspective, at least in 1966, was given the Johannine community, that the other folks were probably ethnic Jews and not Gentiles, because their concern was not of the Gentiles.
Oh, wow.
That was not what that was about at all, and that's appalling reading on top of a Johannine document, because that's not what John was concerned about. And so Raymond Brown comes off in if this were a symphony, this would be one of the minor notes, because I do think that the major note in this is, John, what you presented. But I also like what you say, Elizabeth. So if we go from either it's other ethnic Jews, because John's Gospel is primarily about John's community, which has Jewish people and Gentiles in it, and the synagogue across the street, so-called synagogue across the street, which they're in grinding relationship with, and that, so that's the beginnings of that, and then we get in there. Jesus is voicing. So who is this? Is it the Messianic community? Is it those who hear his voice? This, if we're going to stay in the passage, in the kind of pericope, it would be whatever that Messianic community is, God's people. The sheep we hear in the first part of this, the sheep are those who hear his voice. Remember that, and that voicing of Jesus, the Messiah, because the Good Shepherd is basically his claim that he is the Messiah, and that is not just Hebrew people, but Gentile people. And then we also get if we take John's Gospel's voicing, which is the earthly Jesus and the so-called Jesus of faith, the so-called mystical Jesus wrapped together, we get your concluding point, which is the voicing of all of humanity, the oneness of all humanity. Interestingly, we say something about this in our Sundays in the Nicene Creed, where we say that the Church is one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic, and the oneness, that phrase of one, really finds its grounding right here.
Definitely.
That's where the catechism, or the creedal catechism, gets its primary impetus, is from this line.
Yeah.
Obviously, I mean, maybe the foundational or central text for ecumenism is John chapter 7. So this is very much 17, not 7, the high priestly prayer of Jesus.
Yeah.
So this is very much a Johannine theme, the oneness of those gathered in Christ.
I just want to say that I have my sense and sensibilities are perhaps where you were alluding to, is that we are so narrow in our humanity, and so tribal in our humanity, and so small in our humanity, that the great shock will be when we experience the divine in the fullness of it, is how, what you would allude to, all that falls away, and we realize we are all one in the divine being who is immersed in all of us. And I do think that the greatest joys that we will experience is the realization of our deep interconnectedness, and that it's all in love, and that we are, as disciples of Jesus, best when we take the grandness of the divine being and we deliver it in the smallness of little acts of love and kindness, and the realization that we don't cast anybody out in any way, no judgments, that we welcome all as a sibling of the divine. And I think that's what you were alluding to, and that's how I most like to read that.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when we talk about it like that, it sounds so, people want to say that's so like kind of hippie soft and, eat too easy or whatever. But in fact, it's so hard. It's too hard to do it. It's just the opposite. And those little acts, choosing the act that's not easy is the hardest part to even recognizing that. And I think that's the great faith of a Johannine mindset is, or Jesus mindset is the faith in the fact that it will work. Like eventually it will work, and we will all be one if we all just keep to the path and keep doing that, But it's so hard, and yet it's been peddled as some soft-hearted, mush.
Yeah, that's really it is hard. Yeah, and I'm somebody who has been very into mystical literature, contemplative practices, very, very into the oneness, and yet I don't think we can make it happen. I think God has to do it.
Oh yeah, I mean always.
I just don't think we even if we're super clear, all one. Certain people in the world, we're just not going to reach.
Right.
And that I only mention that because I think it is relevant to the passage. Jesus has to lay down his life for some reason. Jesus, when he's dealing with Pilate later in John's gospel, I don't think it's just a face-off between Jesus and, the man or whatever, being represented by Pilate. I think Jesus is looking at Pilate as a human being who is potentially a convert, if you will.
Yeah, I do too.
But Pilate is not reached. Maybe almost.
As far as we know.
Right, as far as we know.
That is true. He starts asking questions.
My hair wants to stand on end with that one. What hairs I have left want to stand on end with that one because, when we were having that conversation, I held up that book, Barabbas. There has to be a great mystical book out there of Pilate and Jesus meeting in an after-death scenario where there has to be some conversation.
Yeah, right.
I mean, somebody has to write that. That is just mystically awesome.
It is.
And speaking of awesome, I want to move us to, we have a voicemail, interpretation and thoughts on the gospel here. So let's play that, and we're creating a bit of a community of interpretation of the discourse on the discourse. Rob, do you know how to tee that up for us?
This is Wayne Goodling from South Bend, Indiana. I put together an appreciation for the three of you doing this each week. My thoughts begin with the end of the 19th century, and the poet Rilke wrote, "Most experiences are unsayable. They happen in a space that no word has ever entered. And yet, despite what Rilke says, I've been watching the three of you speak about the unspoken for months now. Thank you." As I looked at next week's text for the fourth Sunday of Easter, I found so many connected ideas that I ended up writing some of them down. In John 10:17, Jesus tells us, "This is why the Father loves me, because I lay down my life." And here I'll share some connected ideas about the text. The shepherd says to us who are his flock, "When powers of hell shall come against my own, I'll not abandon nor leave you alone. And you who crucified and abandoned me, I've come to heal with love which is so great that if I must again lay down my life, I'd gladly do it one more time for thee." My Jesus knows the Father as a son. He knows that we belong to him as well. His love that gives him power to lay life down, and he has power to take it up again. So knowing this, I somewhat comprehend how Jesus laid his whole life down. The lamb became the shepherd for the sheep.
Thank you so much, Wayne. The three of us are really touched and love your insights into the gospel. And for those of you who are in the neighborhood, you are in for a treat because it's not the three of us in the pulpit this coming Sunday. The Reverend Dr. Carolyn Sharp is going to be with us, a homiletics professor from the Yale Divinity School with a PhD in the Hebrew Scriptures. And she's going to be coming, bringing the word to us. And so that's 10 o'clock on Sunday morning if you're in the neighborhood. And we'll see you then. And God bless you. And thanks for seeing us now. Take care. Peace be with you.